What is the worst thing you've ever seen happen at a wedding? Divorced father of the groom started up about how much better his new wife was compared to his old wife during his speech, on and the qualities of Asian women versus white women. I've never looked at my shoes so hard in my life. The sister of the bride who wasn't invited showed up drunk and got in a fight with the bride until the father of the bride broke it up by putting the sister in a chokehold and dragging her out of the venue. The bride was surprisingly fine afterwards. Source: I'm a wedding caterer. I was at a wedding where the best man got up and explained how important this speech was to him, because even though he has a stutter and public speaking is very hard for him, the groom had picked him. It immediately became clear that his stutter was severe, but everyone of course looked at each other like, isn't this amazing? What a touching moment. It felt like a movie moment as he struggled forward into what we all assumed would be a poignant speech. However, it quickly became clear that this was indeed one of the worst best man speeches of all time, with him referencing exes, freaking stories, jokes about the groom's small dong, and how hot he thought the bride was. But of course, it was all coming out in a slow, horrible stutter that made everything much worse. At the end, everyone was mortified except for him. He looked incredibly proud. This is freaking hilarious. Not for those present, but god dang. One of my wife's co-workers got married this past summer. Her father passed away from a fatal heart attack the morning of the wedding, but her family insisted and convinced her to go in with it, so she did. It was awkward as heck and nobody in the building made it through without crying, even the minister. My granddad did that the day before my wedding. Great way to go, all his kids there and a nice meal. My mother-in-law handed out an EP of my now sister-in-law to as many guests as she could and threw a fit in the middle of the dance floor later that night because I didn't let her daughter sing with the band or karaoke. Her exact words were, "How dare you make today all about you? It was my wedding day." I worked weddings for a living and once saw the best man get loaded, give a speech, and profess his love of the bride and how they had slept together 2 nights before. Open bar. 1. Best man. 0. That open bar did the groom a favor. Just prior to my sister's wedding ceremony beginning, as everyone was getting in place and last minute things were being done in this big old Catholic church, my father noticed a woman with a confused look at the back of the church and approached her, asking if she needed anything. She informed him she was the bride, then opened a beat up suitcase she had which contained something resembling a wedding type dress. My father, suspecting she had some mental health issues, played along, suggesting that she may be in the wrong church. When that didn't work, he slipped off and called the police. In the meantime, the lady walked up to my soon-to-be brother-in-law and said, "You aren't going to leave me this time." When the police pulled up to the church, the lady spotted them and made a quick exit. Turns out she had a habit of pulling the stunt. My brother-in-law still occasionally reminds my sister that he had a choice on their wedding day, but still chose her. The bride fainted and hit her head hard enough to go to the hospital in an ambulance. No refunds, so they amazingly still had the reception. Pretty subdued. We had a few drinks and just left. Not a bad thing that happened for me, just really awkward. Went to wedding of someone from my church a few years back. When it came time to say the vows, he pulls out a sheet of paper and reads on for like 5 minutes, getting really intimate and pouring his heart out to her. It was kind of awkward tbh, but the icing on the cake was her response. When he was done, she just giggled loudly and awkwardly and got out. Ditto, that's it. That was her wedding vow. So freaking awkward. Bride never showed up. My cousin was the groom and had about 500 people in attendance. He got on the mic and said there's no bride, so we had the party anyway. He married someone else 2 years later. I worked at a wedding venue for 4 years. Having to stop a bride's stepdad from hitting her over the head with a chair was a highlight. The whole room were just fighting with each other. The best man kicked the mother-in-law. Different wedding. Some dickhead bit the DJ because he refused to play a certain song. For me, the absolute worst one was when the newlyweds were arguing at the end of the night, in front of their young son. She admitted to cheating on him. It all came out there and then in front of his family and he was devastated. What is with this thread and people biting each other? There was this guy outside of the hotel walking up to groups of people in the smoking area, asking how much each person weighed. He was very overweight himself, and his jeans looked to be on inside out. He was severely underdressed for the occasion, and no one seemed to know him. Anyways, he would ask a person's weight, and then exclaim, "I can bench that," until one guy, I think he was a family member of the bride, got into an argument with him and started asking around if anyone knew this person, figuring that he was a wedding crasher. That's when this gentleman decided to cut a deal with everyone. "If I can pick up that bench with my bare hands, can I stay for the party?" To which everyone agrees, because the bench was clearly bolted to the ground. So, he walks over, puts his hands on the bench, crouches down, and with all of his might, shoots his pants in front of everyone. He stood up and waddled off through the parking lot to never be seen again. I did hear throughout the night people talking about a guy who was on shrooms outside, trying to lift a bench. So, I guess he was also tripping balls. I'm so jealous to have not experienced this story firsthand. I ruined my cousin's wedding videos and I'll never live it down. When I was 13, my cousin got married and my brother was in charge of photography and video for the day. At some point in the day, my brother gave me the camcorder and told me to shoot and take video. Longer story shorter, I was unknowingly recording when myself and another cousin were talking about girls at the wedding, and as one girl walked by I said I would frick that girl in the fricking butt. 1 week later, the whole entire family decided to watch the video of the wedding and I have never felt so fricking embarrassed in my life. No, I never actually fricked that girl in the fricking butt, but my family occasionally likes to ask, "Hey, you gonna frick that girl in the fricking butt?" whenever I bring a new girl around, usually while she's standing right next to me. I'm 25 now and it's been a funny 12 years at my expense. Suckers. And you learned the most important lesson about electronic media. The mic is always on. The groom was drinking heavily and by the time the cake was supposed to be cut, he was passed out at the back of the room. The bride was crying hysterically. Dad stepped in and cut the cake with the bride, former maitre d'hotel. There was like an 8-year-old boy who had loads of confetti in his hand, so I didn't think much of it. Turns out he thought it was sugar paper and ate all of. He then proceeded to projectile vomit everywhere through the middle of the ceremony. Was one of the funniest and most disgusting moments of my life. I'm just trying to imagine his thought process. Well, the first one didn't taste like sugar, let's try another. No, just paper. Maybe this yellow bit over here. Well, I'll be darned. Let's try the red. After arriving 45 minutes after the ceremony was to begin, during the ring exchange, the groom gets this blank look and says he didn't know he was supposed to buy her another ring. Sil slipped off her wedding band and handed it off to the preacher. This is probably something they should have discussed beforehand. The wedding ring isn't supposed to be a surprise. Nervous groom stood with his legs straight for too long, fell forward and knocked himself out cold, hitting the first step to the platform with his head. For the bouquet toss, a middle-aged guy forced his middle-aged girlfriend out onto the floor, then stood by her so she couldn't leave. The bouquet was caught by an excited little girl. The guy proceeded to yank the bouquet out of the little girl's hands, gave it to his middle-aged girlfriend, then ran off the floor cheering loudly to high-five one of his buddies. The little girl ran away crying. Just as the bride started walking down the aisle, her grandmother had a sudden cardiac event. We had to stop the procession and start CPR in the aisleway. What's worse is that we were in a large park, and people calling 911 couldn't give the address. I ran to the ranger's station, but it was locked. I broke a window screen and crawled through to use a landline EMS could trace and respond. She didn't make it. As an added bonus to the horrible situation, I later found out the ranger had placed a hidden camera in the women's restroom where the girls got ready dressed for the wedding. He served jail time. At least the creep ranger didn't get away with it. I was at a wedding where one of the bridesmaids had gotten married a month earlier and thought it was a good idea to change out of her dress into her wedding dress for the reception. We in the wedding party told her to change back. She decided to stand at the head of the buffet line and tell each and every one of us as we came through the line how she felt. F you, I F'd your husband, you're a C. It goes on and on. Booze was involved, so you can imagine how it was. She refused to change out of her wedding dress until one of the other bridesmaids locked her in the bathroom and told her to change or it was going to get physical. She changed and left not long after. The rest of the reception was a fantastic time. Was at a wedding this summer. The groom's family absolutely tore their son brother apart during the speeches. They didn't say one loving thing and went on to talk about all the mistakes he made during this life. The worst thing they brought up was how he was responsible for a car accident that put someone in a coma. I was cringing. Oh, and one more travesty. Dinner wasn't served until 10 p.m. Having that sort of family would be reason enough to elope. If the bride didn't want to elope, then offer a destination wedding for her and her closest family if they really wanted to, and you could afford it. One of my best friend's weddings. The groom got so drunk that he straight disappeared from the reception. Crap got real awkward when it was time for the wedding to be over. The venue was kicking us out and the bride and groom were supposed to take off in their vintage car and drive off to their honeymoon suite. The music went off, lights went on, and it turned into the guests searching for the dang groom. My husband finally found him in the parking lot, basically face down on his lips. He helped him back into the wedding, which was basically the most awkward walk of shame past the bride's glaring dad and grandfather. The groom was too drunk to drive. Bride's grandfather drove them to their hotel suite, which was a 30-minute drive. My friend, the bride, later told me that when they got in the room, her new husband passed out cold on the bed and she had to wander the halls in her wedding dress looking for someone to unhook her dress for her so she could get out of it. She had to wander the halls in her wedding dress looking for someone to unhook her dress for her so she could get out of it. This is the saddest part. I went to a wedding in a huge manor house on a cliff overlooking the ocean. The house was lit up by big floodlights and the floor pointing up at the house. When it got dark, some guests ran inside to the bar dance floor and shouted at people to come outside and look. A man and a woman, who met for the first time at the wedding, were freaking below one of the floodlights but didn't realize that their gyrations were being projected 50 feet high onto the side of the house. A perfect shadow of two shaggers. They were very embarrassed when they found out. Real life shadow pee on the side of a house isn't exactly what you would expect at a wedding. Friend's wedding a few years ago. The DJ had screens up for slideshows of the bride and groom that were played during some of the songs. Fine. DJ screensaver was Girls Gone Wild style videos. We saw lots of tea on those screens. This isn't a best wedding ever thread. We were partying in Puerto Vallarta, and there was a beautiful wedding going on at the hotel next door. A friend of mine was pretty drunk, then just sprinted for the wedding. He hopped the wall, blasted through the seating arrangements, then body slammed the 6-foot tall wedding cake. He spent the next 2 days in Mexican jail and will forever be a freaking prick in my heart. I'm guessing this isn't the only story of him making great decisions while drunk. Ex-boyfriend of the bride got super drunk at the reception and started rambling loudly, heard by half the reception hall, about how the marriage was wrong and how she was the love of his life. He was there with his then new, presumably imminently ex-girlfriend. Frick knows why she invited him. If there's one thing that I learned from watching How I Met Your Mother, it is that I should never invite my ex to my wedding, or crap happens. I get it, guys. This doesn't happen with everyone. The replies to this comment prove me wrong. PLS stop responding. I wasn't expecting so many replies. For the love of everything that is holy. PLSSTAHP. My husband's brother having a seaside wedding. Our almost 2-year-old was the ring bearer. He passed off the rings to the best man, Dad, then toddled away, off the cliff. It was proper 60-80 feet drop to the beach below, but he luckily got caught up in the bushes, and husband snatched him up. He was buckled into his stroller after that. Kamikaze kid. I think my heart stopped for a second until I reached the end of your post. Glad he was okay. At my wedding. I'm Australian. We were getting to the speeches part of the night, but were waiting for me to come back from the toilets. The meal had not quite agreed with me and I was dealing with the consequences. My buddy who was being MC was currently stalling the 110-ish people and decided it'd be funny to come find me, wandering mic in hand. He enters the toilets and asks how much longer I'll be. I didn't know he had a mic and that everyone was waiting for me, so replied quickly back with an angry frick off. See, I'm doing a crap. I'll be done when I am freaking done. Much to the horror of the people in the next room. Brother and sister-in-law thought it would be fun to have their dogs walk down the aisle after their flower girl spread the flower petals. The dogs thought midway down the aisle was the perfect place for a crapping photo op on the white runner. My dog was at my wedding. At least ours waited until we were saying our vows before she dropped a deuce. Nobody caught a photo of it happening. Crying shame because that would have been on our thank you cards. My cousin's mother-in-law told my cousin that her dress was ugly and then called the next day to ask if they had fricked. Super awkward. My cousin is super religious and modest and was waiting for her wedding night to do anything, so it was extremely embarrassing for her. I was friends with a couple that had split right before my wedding. I knew I couldn't invite both of them and I was closer friends with guy, but he decided to move out of state after the breakup, so I invited the girl. Let's call her Kelly. Kelly shows up with a new younger knockoff version of her recent ex. Cool, whatever. Kelly is about 5'11", 120 pounds, maybe. Good looking girl, long legs. She decided to wear a mini pleather skirt, which wouldn't have been too bad, only there was also a 2-inch slit up the back. A little much for a wedding, but whatever. The whole wedding family members, friends and co-workers kept asking me who Kelly was and if I knew. She was basically flashing all her goodies to the whole guest list all night, including the children. See, I was too distracted by my wedding to notice that Kelly also decided to not wear underwear. So every time she sat down during the ceremony and reception, her chonch and butt would be visible for all behind her to see. Thanks Kelly. Now my 90-year-old great-grandma knows all too well what your chonch looks like. When you're 5'11", sometimes you learn the hard way that clothes are designed for women who are 5'6". Sorry your wedding was a peep show. At my own wedding reception, I saw my wife's grandma, who was about 98, very slowly and with a terrible sense of inevitability fall sideways off her chair. She remained in a sitting position but just slowly tilted sideways till she was on the floor, still in the exact same pose. It sounds crappy, but all I could think was, fuck's sake, don't die at our wedding, please don't die at our wedding. Luckily she was fine and lived for another few years to see her 100th birthday. I thought my wife's grandma died at our wedding. THX for the karma, Grandma Mary. When my brother and new wife got to the hotel apologized for the rowdy lot in the bar. My brother said it's fine as they were our family. That's hilarious. My friend got married around age 21. Neither he nor the bride had much money, so the wedding was modest but still very nice. They did have a lovely 3-tier cake though. The ceremony goes fine and the bride will cut the cake, music is playing. She was a dainty, tiny little thing, maybe 5 feet 2 inches and 100 pounds soaking wet. If she swatted a fly it might not even notice. She approaches the cake with a knife, barely touches it, and boom, the whole thing immediately collapses. All 3 tiers somehow, all over someone's elderly grandmother who was seated right by the ill-fated cake. That old lady, who had barely moved throughout the whole affair, shot out of her chair like she was fired from a cannon, screeching bloody goddamn murder and sending cake shrapnel all over those nearby. Another close friend and I watched the whole thing from close range and were paralyzed and purple from hysterical breathless laughter, as were many of the other guests. I later heard the bakery refunded them for the cake due to its not up to code construction. They should have charged them double for generating memories that no one will ever forget. It was the man of honor, like a maid of honor, except a guy. There was also still a best man. During the man of honor speech, the guy repeatedly said the name of the bride's ex instead of her new husband. 3 times. When I first saw bride and bride's ex, I knew they were perfect for each other. Stuff like that. And he caught himself, too, every time. He was insanely embarrassed, but he still did it 3 times throughout the speech. It was so awkward watching it happen. Probably the biggest social train wreck I've ever seen. Plot twist: man of honor was the bride's ex. Friend's wedding. The bride's nephew, about 7, I think, was the ring bearer. Instead of sitting at the front after he made it down the aisle, he decided to do karate moves in front of and sometimes behind the couple during the entire ceremony. He's in almost all their photos. An alarming number of you are worried that this was you. The boy's still too young to really be on Reddit, I think, so you're probably safe from anonymous internet judgment. LOL. Now he's part owner of a bar in Philadelphia. Not that bad, but the maid of honor, wife's sister, speech at my wedding. Holy crap. This was hands down the worst, most cringy speech I have ever heard. Right before, my best man's speech was great, touching, and only took about 5 minutes. First thing she says, well, I'm not gonna get all fake and sappy like that last speech. No one laughed. He and I looked at each other like WTF. She had 2 pages of typed up words in her hand, shaking, and still managed to ramble on for 20 minutes. 20. You could tell she never actually practiced the whole thing. She lost her place a few times, started crying a few times, her family kept telling her she was doing great, and she told them quite audibly to shut up. She said she was a spicy meatball, said that like 10 plus times, referenced how she almost slept with me and that her sister is lucky she didn't or we wouldn't be together. Talked about all these negative experiences with my wife and the one nice thing she said was but you're my sister and I love you, which made her cry again. God, I just wanted it to end. That 20 minutes was a freaking eternity. The wedding ceremony for Lance and Vicky was ending when the priest said, I now introduce you to Vance and Licky, husband and wife. My dad's friend's son got married when I was a teenager. He's a really cool guy and we played Nintendo a lot whenever we visited. Anyway, the embarrassing story is about his bride. She decided that she wanted to sing to him at one point during the ceremony, so she chose the song, Wind Beneath My Wings by Bette Midler. Midler is an alto. The bride was a high soprano. Unfortunately, she couldn't sing very well, either. So for several minutes she squeaks this song out while he's standing there with the most awkward look on his face. I think everyone felt embarrassed. I know I did. The good thing is that they're still happily married and have a daughter. Why people think singing to their so on their wedding day is not cringy is beyond me. At the reception, the bride received a tip to go out to the parking lot where she found her new husband making out with his ex-GF. The ensuing fight came inside the hall and the party screeched to a halt. Both families were displeased and stuck him with a lot of bills. We kept our gift. Good on whoever gave her the tip. That's freaking balls. I was an attendant in my best friend's wedding. Her father walked her down the aisle and while he was not visibly drunk, he had a hard time walking behind her to sit in the pew. He stepped on her dress, ripping it from her back down to her butt. Her thong was red. They had to stop the wedding so that she could find safety pins. Her thong was red. Details like these makes wedding stories worthwhile. Went to my cousin's wedding and the groom and men wore tuxedo shirts and when they got to the I do's he said AWW crap, I guess. Shortly after eating they proceeded to light the trash on fire and shoot clay pigeons behind the house after heavy drinking. Good times. My friend got married, and apparently the bride's best friend had some past issues with the groom's cousins. It was tense all night until a fight broke out between them. The groom's cousin started throwing punches and the bride's friend brought out a knife. He ended up cutting his hand after 3 guys had to pry them apart. Pretty interesting, but got super awkward once the bride started hysterically crying after screaming for about 3 minutes. Grandmother broke her ankle dancing. Didn't want to bother anyone so sat down for the rest of the night. A&E at 11 PM 3 hours later. Welsh grannies are hard. I once worked a wedding where one of the guests thought it would be perfectly reasonable to change her baby's crappy diaper on a table where other guests were eating. I offered to show her the restroom where we had a baby changing station or even an empty banquet room. But the disgusting bee said she was finished and had the audacity to shove the dirty diaper at me and tell me to throw it away for her. The other guests looked both disgusted and mortified. Witnessed almost the exact same thing while working a wedding, except it was the table that the actual wedding cake was on. Even worse, the whole thing appeared to be done for a bizarre photo op. We tried to stop it before it began, but people with this little common sense generally cannot be reasoned with. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.